Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as SaffronOlive. We're back here with another edition of Budget Magic. This week, for the third week in a row, we are going into the modern format. I know that might seem excessive, but it's really modern time of year. We just had Modern Masters released. Last week was a huge and very successful GP in Charlotte featuring the modern format. And we have modern PTQ season heading right around the corner. So this is a good time to focus on the format a bit. This week we are playing Blue-White Tempered Steel. This deck is basically a budgetized version of Affinity. That's one of the great things about this deck is this is a pathway and a foundation for you to build into a real legitimate tier 1 modern deck, or tier 1.5 at the moment, whatever it is. A very heavily played and powerful modern deck. What we're working with is a deck that costs about 6 tickets online, about 85 bucks in paper, so pretty reasonable. And it plays a lot like the actual Affinity decks. We have a bunch of cheap artifacts, and then we have some payoff cards that take advantage of having those cheap artifacts. So we have 4 copies of Memnite, a 0-cost 1/1 artifact creature. Also 4 copies of Ornithopter, 0-cost 0/2 flying artifact creature. So we're really looking to get one of those down on turn 1 to start fueling the rest of our game plan. Also have Signal Pest, so these are our 1-drops. Hopefully we're playing these on turn 1 as well. Signal Pest costs 1 mana, you get a 0/1 that can only be blocked by creatures with flying and reach, but it has Battle Cry. So when Signal Pest attacks, it gives all of our other attacking creatures +1/+0. So it's kind of a temporary crusade effect for our other creatures. So it works really well with Ornithopters and Memnites, lets them hit a little bit earlier as soon as turn 2. Vault Scourge, I know it costs 2 mana, 1 and a black Phyrexian mana. When we get to our lands, you'll see that we really don't have a way to play black mana. There's a couple fringe ways, but typically we're casting it for 1 mana and 2 life. And for that 1 mana and 2 life, we get a 1/1 flying lifelink artifact creature. Then we also have Etched Champions. This is one of the premier cards in our deck, especially as far as creatures go. It's a 3 mana 2/2 artifact creature. And it has Metalcraft, where if you have 3 artifacts, it has protection from all colors. So it's very difficult to deal with. And it's important to remember it counts itself as an artifact. So you really only need 2 other artifacts and the champion, and you have this very difficult to beat creature. Then we have the start of our payoff cards. We have 3 Frogmites. I guess this isn't a real payoff because it's only a 2/2. But the nice thing is we get to play it for free a lot. It's a 4 mana 2/2, but it has Affinity for artifacts, so it costs 1 less to cast for each artifact we control. Mirror Enforcer, have 3 copies of him as well, or it as well. It is a 7 mana 4/4, but it also has Affinity for artifacts. So it gets cheaper for each artifact we have. Usually end up casting this one for 2 or 3 mana. Sometimes it's completely free in the late game. So just another big threat that can come down cheaply. Speaking of Affinity cards, we also have 3 copies of Thoughtcast. 4 and a blue, you get to draw 2 cards at sorcery speed. But it also has Affinity for artifacts. So if you have 4 artifacts, you get to cast this for 1 blue mana and draw 2 cards. It's basically another way to refuel. As you saw with our creatures, we have a lot of cheap creatures. Sometimes we dump our hand very quickly and are down to like 0 or 1 cards on turn 2. This is a way to keep some juice in the old hand and to refuel after we dump everything on the battlefield. This is definitely an aggro deck, and that's how this deck works. You want to play everything as fast as you can, kill your opponent as fast as you can, and Thoughtcast fits well into that plan. Springleaf Drum adds a lot of explosion to this deck. It's a 1 mana artifact. It allows you to tap an untapped creature and add 1 mana of any color. So I mentioned how we can sometimes pay the black mana for Vault Scourge. Well, Springleaf Drum is that way to make black mana. But the most important thing it does is let us play multiple 1-drops on turn 1. Then these are our real payoff cards. Etched Champion is included. That's one of the payoff cards. But the big ones are Ensoul Artifact. It is 1 and a blue for an enchantment aura, and you can enchant an artifact and it becomes a 5/5 creature, basically. That's its base power and toughness. So that works really well with Ornithopters, even Memnites or Vault Scourge, turn our little dorks into big beaters. Also works extremely well with one of our lands, Darksteel Citadel, which is an artifact land, but it's also indestructible. So if we stick a Soul Artifact on there, we have an indestructible 5/5 creature, which is pretty good. Also, Cranial Plating, probably the best overall card in the deck. 2-cost artifact equipment. An equipped creature gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control, and you get to equip it for 1, or you can attach it to a creature you control for 2 black. Now that doesn't really come up in this deck since we don't have the mana for it. We're pretty much always equipping it. But the difference between equipping and attaching is attaching you can do at instant speed whenever you want to, when you can only equip as a sorcery. But it's really powerful. When we dump a bunch of artifacts on the board and stick Cranial Plating on a Vault Scourge, we make any of our creatures into just huge, sometimes evasive threats. So we have a 7/1 or 8/1 Vault Scourge, or just like this huge Ornithopter, and it's a way to make any of those cheap dorks very powerful. And then the namesake card, Tempered Steel. You might remember this card from Standard a few years ago. It's like a super crusade for artifacts. You pay 1 and 2 white for an enchantment, and all your artifact creatures get +2/+2 until end of turn. So one of the things this deck is missing, since it's a budget build, is Arcbound Ravager and Steel Overseer, which are two of the big payoff cards in the Affinity deck. They pump your team. They allow you to make a huge threat. So Tempered Steel sort of plays a budget equivalent to this role, and it is extremely powerful. When you make all these 0-drops into 3/3s or 2/4 flyers or whatever on turn 3, you win a lot of games that way. +2/+2 is a lot of power and toughness boosting. So that is the way that we win a lot of games, and it's really good with that champion. A 4/4 protection from everything is a very difficult card to beat. So then our lands, we have 4 copies of Glacial Fortress, blue-white dual land, budget alternative. If you have Adakar Waste, it might actually be better in this deck. I happen to have the Glacial Fortresses in my collection, so those were what I used. One thing I've noticed playing the deck is sometimes Glacial Fortress comes into play tapped when we really want it to be untapped. And in the paper world, buying Adakar Waste isn't that much more than buying Glacial Fortress. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you build this deck. Either one is functional, but I think Adakar Waste might actually be slightly better. Of course, if you have Hallowed Fountains and such, those are probably even better still. But so some sort of budget blue-white duel, hopefully that comes into play untapped. 4 Darksteel Citadels, we already talked about this. This fuels our affinity cost, for one thing. Also is a payoff card within Soul Artifact. 4 copies of Blinkmoth Nexus. I almost didn't have these in the deck, but their price has decreased quite a bit thanks to Modern Masters 2015. And it's a very good card in the deck. It taps to add 1 colorless mana. You can pay 1, make it a 1/1 flying artifact creature, and then you can pay 1 and tap it, and you can give another or a Blinkmouth creature +1/+1 until end of turn. So if you've ever played with Mishra's Factory, you can do that same sort of trick. Why it's only a 1/1 attacker, you can activate it and block and tap it and pump it to make it a 2/2 blocker and sometimes pick off some little creatures if your opponent isn't paying attention. And then we also have 3 plains, 3 islands, not too exciting, just some basic lands. In the sideboard, we have 3 copies of Rapid Hybridization. This is a way for a blue deck on a budget to break up combos. Use it against the Collective Company and Offenza deck to break up their combo. Deceiver Exarch, anything like that. Very good for that. We have 4 copies of Negate. Spreading Seas. This is a tricky one, but this card is actually very good. It actually sort of gives us a chance against Tron or against Amulet Bloom. Especially Tron, but even Amulet Bloom, they play a bounce land. You can Spreading Seas it and draw a card. They're going to play another bounce land eventually and return that bounce land to their hand, but it does slow them down like a whole turn of development. So it's still very good in that matchup. Oblivion Ring, catch-all removal spell. Dispels, another counter spell. 1 blue, you can counter an instant. And then we also have Relic of Progenitus, another great card for this deck because it's an artifact and it cycles, and sometimes it actually matters to attack our opponent's graveyard. If our opponent's playing Delver of Secrets or things with Hooting Mandrills or Tassiger, Gurmag Angler, the Relic of Progenitus is a great card to have in those matchups. So basically, this deck is very functional as is, and it offers a great pathway and foundation to build into a Tier 1 Modern deck. So before we go, I'm going to hop over and just show you full-built Affinity list and mention briefly some of the cards that you'll be looking to trade into, so you can see the similarities and see what's missing from a full Tier 1 Affinity list. So this is an actual Tier 1 Affinity list. As you can see, a lot of the foundation is the same. Ornithopter, Signal Pest, Vault Scourge, Etch Champion, Memnite, Cranial Plating, Springleaf Drum, Darksteel Citadel, Blinkmoth Nexus, Island, but it has a lot of the same cards. What we're missing is about $100 worth of Arcbound Ravager. So if you see these around, this was a card that was not reprinted in Modern Masters 2015. Its price has actually been increasing lately because it wasn't reprinted. This is one of the key pieces to the deck. 4 copies of Steel Overseer. This is the card that we are kind of replacing with Tempered Steel. It's a 2-mana 1/1 artifact creature. You tap it and put a +1/+1 counter on each artifact creature you control. Also, 2 copies of Master of Ethereum. Its power and toughness is equal to the number of artifacts you control, and it gives your other artifact creatures +1/+1. Basically, we are playing 4 copies of Etch Champion instead of a 2-2 split on Master of Ethereum and Etch Champion. It can kind of go either way. Spellskite, just a good value artifact. Essential against things like Infect, helpful against Burn. This was reprinted in Modern Masters 2015, so its price is down. If you're thinking about adding some immediate money to the deck, this is a good option because the price will start increasing again. So not a bad card to pick up soon. Mox Opal, another huge one. This allows the deck to be even more explosive. Where we have Springleaf Drum to serve this role, this deck, the Tier 1 deck, has Springleaf Drum, but also 4 copies of Mox Opal. If you have Metalcraft, it is basically just a Mox, but it adds 1 mana of any color. So you can play 0-drop artifact, artifact land, Mox Opal, and you have a lot of mana on turn 1. This one has dipped a bit thanks to Modern Masters 2015. Not a ton, because it's at Mythic, and it's a premier card in Modern. So still not a bad time to pick up Mox Opals if you want to spend a little extra money. As far as the mana base, the big deal is 4 copies of Inkmoth Nexus. This gives you 8-man lands that are artifacts. Glimmer Void, some decks play 4 of these. This one only has 2. It is a 5-color land, but if you control no artifacts, you have to sacrifice it. So it's a little risky if you get Shatterstormed or something like that, but it's very powerful, and you'll see in the sideboard, they got some Thought Seizes, Whip Flares, Ancient Grudge, which flashes back for green. The combination of Mox Opal and Glimmer Void lets you play basically any color you want out of the sideboard, so it's pretty helpful. But anyway, those are the big ones. Arcbound Ravager, Steel Overseer, perhaps Master of Ethereum, even though that's not always in the deck. Spellskite, Mox Opal, and Inkmoth Nexus. Adding any of those will make the deck much more powerful. So if you're trading, and if you build this deck and you're trading, or you're looking to buy some cards, those are the cards you want to focus on. Pick up some of those here and there. But like I said, our version, the Blue-White Tempered Steel version, is actually very powerful. Had a good record with it. It kills a lot of people and plays pretty well. So if you like aggro decks, if you like artifacts, give it a shot. I don't think you'll be disappointed. And thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy the videos.